We're making homemade granola today, and it really couldn't be any easier. We're going to start with our oats, and I need 4 cups of oats. I like to use the old-fashioned or rolled oats. They are thicker and heartier than a 1 minute or a quick oat, and they just hold up better when you're making granola. You want a little texture when you're making granola. So 4 cups. And then we're going to add pecans. We're making maple pecan granola. But the fun thing about making granola is you can really adapt this to whatever you have on hand. I'm using pecans, but you could use walnuts or almonds, whatever you want, or leave the nuts out altogether. And I'm using 1.5 cups of pecans. You could also increase or decrease the amount however you wanted. I've given these just a rough chop because I want a little texture to my pecans. When I buy pecans, I buy them in bulk, and I store some of my pecans in a quart-sized jar and keep in my pantry. The rest I put in a freezer-safe bag, and I keep in my deep freeze until I've used up what I have in my pantry and I substitute them out. They're cheaper that way, and they last longer if you can store them in your freezer. If you don't use a quart within a reasonable amount of time, store them in a smaller size container. All right, this just gets set aside and we're going to mix up the seasoning that goes over these. Super simple. 1/3 cup of an oil, and this time I'm actually using an avocado oil. You can use any sort of light tasting oil. I've used canola, vegetable oil, whatever works best for you. You just want it light tasting because we don't want to taste the oil. We want to taste everything else in our granola. And then we're going to use 1/2 cup of maple syrup and 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla. Just give this a stir up as best as you can. And then this gets poured right over top. Give this a good stir so everything is coated. Okay, I have taken a cookie sheet and lined it with a piece of parchment paper. I like to use parchment paper because it prevents the granola from sticking to the pan. If you don't have parchment paper or don't prefer to use it, you have a silicone mat, that works, or just give it a light spray with a cooking spray. This goes right onto my tray. Spread it out. The last thing I like to do is just give a little pinch of salt all over the top. This just helps balance the sweetness of the maple syrup a little bit. This goes into an oven. I have a preheated 300-degree oven. After about 30 minutes, I'm going to go in and gently stir this around, flip it over, and then I'll cook it for another about 15 or 20 minutes until it's really nice and crisp. Okay, it's been 30 minutes, so I want to take this out and just kind of move it around gently. Okay, spread it back out so it's nice and even. Okay, back into the oven. We're going to check it in about 15 minutes, but it could take anywhere between 15 to 30 more minutes, depending on how browned you like it. So we're going to keep an eye on it because we don't want it to burn, but we do want it to become slightly toasted. Okay, it has been 20 more minutes, and I am going to call my granola done. Now we need to just let it set and rest because right now it is very soft because everything is hot. We need to cool down and let the maple syrup solidify on here so that we get those little crumbles. I can tell it's done because I see little bits of browning across the top of my granola, and my pecans are just slightly toasted. All right, this is mostly cooled, still just a tad bit warm, but I just can't wait to get into here. So what we're going to do is just gently break this apart so that we have a few little clusters, because the clusters are my favorite part. I just like to take the parchment paper and just release it. And you can see we get, if we're careful, we get these clusters, and they're going to still crumble. That's what granola is all about. And then I like to store mine in quart-sized jars with lids. I'm going to give this little cluster a try. It has the pecans and the oats in there. It's perfectly sweetened with the maple syrup. And the pecans are just one of my favorite nuts to eat. This is going to be perfect over yogurt or with fresh fruit or however you like to eat your granola. Just a little bit of milk would be fine too. Once this granola cools, then I'll add the lid and store it in my pantry. This would also make a great gift if you put a lid on it and a little bow with a tag. And just imagine giving that as a hostess gift or a Christmas gift.